Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for today's webinar, which is hosted by the University of Maryland Eastern Shore Extension. My name is Moses Cairo, and I serve as the Dean for the School of Agricultural and Natural Sciences. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the webinar this afternoon. Now, this webinar is organized under the auspices of UMES Extension, which is part of the statewide extension collaborative with the University of Maryland Extension. So for the last couple of years, UMES Extension has been in a process of investing federal and state dollars to develop and enhance its extension programming so that we can better serve the citizens of Maryland. And one of the areas that we identified as requiring development was the area of agritourism. As you are aware, recognizing the importance of agritourism to the state, the Maryland General Assembly passed House Bill 252 in 2018 to provide a framework for the characterization of agritourism in the state. The bill itself defined agritourism as an activity that's conducted on a farm offered to the public for education, leisure, or active participation in the farm daily operation. So local county authorities were able to adopt this definition as they addressed land use management laws and regulations. So from the outset, we here at UMES Extension contemplated launching an extension education program to support this sector. But it was clear to us from the beginning that we had little understanding of the breadth and complexity of the industry. Therefore, we decided to take a deliberate and information-driven process, which would also, of course, include an extensive stakeholder engagement to identify and prioritize those areas where there was greatest need. So the baseline profile report, which is the subject of this afternoon's webinar, is our first step in this process. This report has been developed over the last couple of years, but this will be followed by a concerted stakeholder engagement effort to help us shape this new program to deliver the most meaningful extension education programs in support of the industry. So to this end, we are looking forward to your feedback this afternoon and input in the process as we move forward. So with this said, it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists for the webinar this afternoon. First up will be Mr. David Balcom, who is the UMES Vice President for University Relations. Mr. Balcom will bring greetings on behalf of the university. He will be followed by Mr. Steve Connolly. As you can imagine, a key element in establishing an effective program will be the establishment of strong partnerships with key players in the industry. And to this end, this is why I'm very delighted that Mr. Steve Connolly, who is the Assistant Secretary for Marketing, Animal Industries, and Consumer Services with the Maryland Department of Agriculture, is on the panel. Also on the panel is Dr. Enrique Nelson Escobar, who is the Associate Dean and Associate Extension Administrator here at UMES. And our main speaker for this afternoon is Dr. Kingsley Ejiogu, who is an Associate Professor in the Department of Criminal Justice in the School of Education, Social Sciences, and the Arts, and he has a partial appointment with UMES Extension. Dr. Ejiogu is an interdisciplinary researcher with training in biology and biotechnology, environmental control, geographic information systems, and administration justice. Dr. Ejiogu's interests and research focus on developing spatial analytic processes and protocols risk estimation tools, strategic program development, evaluation, and social justice governance. So we are delighted that we've been partnering with him in this venture. Beg your pardon. So at the end of his presentation, we'll have a Q&A. You can place your questions in the using the Q&A function, and we will try and cover as many of those as we can this afternoon. So without much ado, I would like to invite Mr. Balcom to bring greetings.
Thank you, Dr. Cairo, and welcome to everybody who is on the panel discussion this afternoon. On behalf of Dr. Heidi Anderson, President of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, we're delighted to welcome you to this program, this very important program to discuss agritourism. I know the university status as an 1890s land grant university is at the center of everything that we do. And so we appreciate all your activities and support, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Balcom. I'll invite Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Dean Cairo. This is Steve Connolly, and I'd like to bring greetings from the Maryland Department of Agriculture and Secretary of Agriculture, Joe Bartenfelder. This topic of this webinar is a very important topic. We're honored to be asked to be a partner with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore Extension because of the importance of this baseline study. And this is going to, there's a lot of opportunities for new and beginning farmers or farmers that want to return back to the farm and try to be part of the farming operation. And agritourism may be the area where there's enough revenue that somebody could start to become a farmer or to come back and be part of the farming operation. Up to now, we've really have maybe struggled a little bit with having the best data available so that we can inform our policymakers that we work with both at the state and local levels about the importance of agritourism. I think this is a very important study, and I'm super excited about being able to be part of this, and thank you, and look forward to doing some hard work with you in the future to make all Maryland agriculture prosper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connolly. And so we're going to move on to our main speaker, Dr. Ejiogu.
Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. It's my pleasure to make the presentation about a baseline study on Maryland agritourism. I'll begin by sharing my screen so everyone can see the presentation PowerPoint. I hope you can all see the PowerPoint. Hello?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Dr. Ejiogu.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'll begin by presenting the objectives of the study. The objectives really is to provide and explore the requirement of agritourism education in order to guide UMES extension in their goal to provide training and education for agritourism stakeholders. So in the study, what we did was to assemble the spatial spread of agritourism entities across the state. And we also looked at the typology of the agritourism activities in the state of Maryland. In other words, we looked at the categories of services provided by agritourism offerers in the state. We also looked at access to transportation, which is a very important infrastructural aid to agritourism prosperity. We looked at the characterization of natural amenities by this as an indicator of environmental quality, which in a way also influences consumers' desire to participate in agritourism. We looked at issues of socioeconomic profile that is population density, which is an indicator of consumer base for agritourism, and also, of course, median income, an indicator for purchasing power for such services. Now, at the heart of agritourism, as detailed by Dr. Cairo, is the desire for small and medium-sized farmers and farmers from undersized community to supplement their incomes and in order to retain their farm holdings. So we also looked at regional and county and in distribution for agritourism. Now, before I begin, I would like to give you a background of the state of farm income and farm size decline in the United States over the years. If we look at this, this chart here, this is a chart of median farm income and median off-farm income from 2016 to 2021 to the present year across the United States. Now, the important thing to notice here is that the average median off-farm income have exceeded median farm income, that is income, and from farm production activities by as much as $70,000, an average of about $70,000 for an average US farming household from over the years of 2016 to the present day. Now, this net chart shows us a line graph of US net farm income and net cash income from the year 2000 to 2021, that's the present year. We notice over these 2 decades, there have been variations and a lot of vagaries on net cash income and net farm income, that is income earned after deduction of production expenses from the net cash income. Now, though we see spikes like increases in net cash and net farm income in years 2004, 2011, and 2014. But if you take a broad look at the pattern, we notice a pattern of income decline over that years. Even as recent as 2020, there was also an income decline going down to 2021. And that's the broad US picture. Now let's come down to the state of Maryland. Now, when we look at the number of acres of farmland in the state of Maryland over the years from 1997 to 2017, that's about 2 decades, we find that whilst the number of small farms identified by this blue line have declined by 30% over that period, the number of median farms have declined by about 18%. When we look at this yellow line here, that is for large farms, we find that the numbers of large farms have in fact increased by about 26%. Now, if we go further to income from farms, we see a similar pattern. While farms that earn less than $20,000 on the average annually have declined in income by about 28%, and medium-sized farms that earn on the average from $100,000 to $499,000 have also declined in income by about 38%. When you look at this green line here, it represents income for large farms, that is farms that earn an average above $500,000 annually. In fact, income from this class of farms have increased by about 170%. So this gives us a broad picture about the ingress of urbanization and the decline and in the productivity and lucrativeness of small and medium-sized farms across the state of Maryland. Now, what we did initially was to explore the density, that is the spatial distribution of agritourism sites in the state. In order to do this, the first thing we did was to identify the location of these sites across the state. Since the state of Maryland does not yet have a comprehensive compendium of its agritourism assets. So in doing this directly, we also corroborated with state agency documents, federal document, USDA databases, we were able to locate 485 sites of agritourism locations across the state. Now, approximately 45% of these entities engaged in more than one type of agritourism service. So what we did was to categorize the services offered to primary service, which is their main service, secondary service, and tertiary services. Now, when you look at the distribution of agritourism sites across the state, you find that a high proportion of these sites are located at the north center of the state, what we call the North Central region, the region where we have the metropolitan counties of Frederick, Montgomery, Baltimore County, Howard, Carroll, and the Baltimore City, as well as Hertford County. Now, in order to understand this further, we looked at population distribution vis-a-vis the distribution of these sites. When we looked at the number of sites per 1,000 people, we found that Talbot County hosted the highest proportion of sites per 1,000 people, with about 0.48 sites per 1,000. And following very closely behind is Kent County with 0.4 sites. And we find that Baltimore City, the popular Baltimore City, had about 0.04 sites per 1,000 people. And at the very end was Prince George's County with about 0.03 sites. But when we compared the number of sites per 100 square miles, we found Baltimore City at the very top with about 29.65 sites per 100 square miles, followed by Montgomery City with 11.6 sites. Then we find Talbot County in the 8th place with about 6.67 sites per 1,000 people. And at the very bottom is Garrett County with 0.77 sites per square mile. Now, next, in order to have a clearer picture of the distribution of these sites across counties in the state, we did a cluster analysis of the distribution using two techniques. This one is a kernel density estimation technique. And when we look at this very map, we find a hotspot, this red colored area at the north center of the state. That is the hotspot. It's at the transect of Howard County. So we find a spatial agglomeration of these agritourism sites at the borders between Howard County and Anne Arundel counties and Howard County and Montgomery County. Now we also notice significant secondary hotspots spreading out towards Baltimore City and covering about half of Baltimore County, and also spreading towards Frederick County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. Now, we used another technique for hotspot analysis, and this one also corroborated our initial kernel density estimation technique when we noticed that the hotspots are also at the northern center of the state within the metropolitan county areas. But with this technique, we noticed a cold spot around the lower eastern shore area between Wycomico County, Somerset County, and Dorchester counties. Now, what these cold spots indicates is that these areas possess significantly lower than average number of agritourism locations. Next, we wanted to understand the type of agritourism services offered across the state. When we did this, we realized that the agritourism philosophy across the state go beyond traditional agricultural practices towards the protection of cultural heritage, the protection of agricultural maintenance of agricultural landscape, land conservation, rural development, protection of biodiversity, and so many others. Now, we now looked at the categories of services offered across the state, both on farm-based agritourism and non-farm-based agritourism, using a Pareto chart. Now, the chart shows us the frequency of these services in descending order. From this chart, we notice that farm markets constitute the largest proportion of these services offered across the state, followed by craft breweries, wineries, agricultural festivals, especially agricultural heritage festivals, creameries, pumpkin patches, and beekeeping, apiaries, and so many others. Now, we noticed that the distribution of these categories of services were in fact county and area specific. For instance, while you found a concentration of large farm markets in the metropolitan county areas of the north central region of the state, we found agricultural heritage festivals in the lower eastern shore areas like Somerset County and the upper eastern shore areas like Talbot County. Now, next, what we did was to look at farm-based agritourism. We looked at farm-based agritourism. And when we looked at the categories of services offered by farm-based agritourism, we found that they in fact followed the Pareto principle or rule, where we found about 80% of the services nested within approximately 20% of the categories. This was very interesting and something that we hope to study further. Now, next we look at those factors that affect participation and the location of agritourism facilities. Two primary factors affect the motivation for stakeholders and operators to engage in agritourism. One of them is place-based factors, and the second one is farm-based factors. Now, in the present report, what we engaged in was on place-based factors. We primarily studied place-based factors, hoping in the subsequent survey of stakeholders described by Dr. Cairo to now explore the farm-based factors that influence the location of these services. Now, some of the place-based factors that we looked at was issues of proximity to nearest urban cities. Given that these cities are centric and well-developed, the tendency is that they could attract visitors from not just within the state, from outside the state, and from, in fact, other countries. Now, we looked at the factor of population density, which is an indicator of the consumer base in an area. We also examined infrastructure by looking at transportation. We examined the proximity and accessibility of the major highways across the state to these agritourism sites. Now, we also examined environmental quality by looking at the Natural Amenities Index across counties in the state, since some of the visitors to this site do so in order to connect back to the natural environment. Now, in examining the distance from this site to major cities, this is a map of major cities in the state of Maryland. We looked primarily at cities with population above 10,000 people, and we found that most of these cities are concentrated in the north center and the southern regions of the state of Maryland, very close to Washington, D.C., and the town of Alexandria near in the state of Virginia. Now, this is a chart of the population density per mile of these cities with populations above 10,000 people and the number of agritourism sites around the cities. Now, these dots represent cities and their population densities. And on these sites are the number of agritourism sites. Now, what we found was that most of the cities had populations less than 4,000, that is population densities of 4,000 per square mile or less. Now, this in no way implies any form of causation in the distribution of these agritourism sites. We know very well, in order to explain these locations, it will definitely involve a broad-based econometric study with multiple explanatory variables. But notwithstanding this, what we notice is a linear trend a kind of linear trend around cities with high population density. We see that for every 2,500 additional population, there's on the average an additional 1 agritourism site. Now, if you look up, the city of Baltimore is an outlier. Okay, the city of Baltimore here is an outlier, having a population density of about 6,448 people per square mile and about 28 agritourism sites. Now, next we looked at purchasing power. We mapped the median income distribution across all the counties in the state. We found that this distribution ranged from an approximate figure of about $40,000 to about $100,000, which we located mostly in the North Central metropolitan counties. So it was interesting to see when we compared the maps of the distribution of the sites and also the median income map, that the top gross income counties located at the center also had more than half of these counties host many of the agritourism operations. Next, we examine the proximity of the sites to consumers, being that proximity to consumers impacts the success of agritourism operations. What we did was to examine the distance from urban cities with populations above 10,000 people to agritourism facilities in each county. Now, when we examined this across counties in the state, we found a maximum distance occurred in Worcester County with about 32 miles recorded, whereas the minimum distance occurred in Howard County with less than 0.5 miles distance from a city with a population above 10,000 people to an agritourism site. Now, what this means for Howard County is that the 20 sites, agritourism sites that we identified in Howard County are very close to urban areas. Now, when we examine the average distance of the cities to the agritourism sites, we found that the least average distance was found of about 2 miles averagely to an agritourism site was found in Baltimore City, and the highest was found of about 13 miles was found in St. Mary's County. Now, next we looked at the factor of infrastructure, being that a good transport system is essential for agritourism. So the factor of proximity and accessibility of the site is very, very significant. Now, we also considered that agribusinesses' proximity to transportation routes impacts the search for cost-effective labor, seeing that for many of these agritourism sites, labor is often seasonal. In order to examine the fact of proximity and accessibility from major federal and state highways to these agritourism sites, we conducted a routine analysis across each of the 5 regions in the state. That's the North Central region, the Western region, the Southern region, the Upper Eastern Shore, and the Lower Eastern Shore regions. So we use the origin to destination technique to create a cost matrix based on miles, distance in miles from an agritourism site to a major highway, state or federal highway within that particular region. Now, to give you an example, let's look at the North Central region, that is the region with most of the metropolitan counties. Now, when we examined proximity from agritourism sites to major state and federal highways in the North Central region, we found that the US-1 highway had the least average distance to agritourism sites of about 15 miles averagely to our agritourism sites. And following that was the I-95 with about 30 miles on the average to an agritourism site. And next was the MD 140, about 33 miles on the average to an agritourism site. Now that's proximity. Next, we looked at the factor of accessibility. Accessibility. When we examined accessibility, we found that the US 40 highway had the most accessible routes, the most number of routes to agritourism sites, of about more than 600 routes to agritourism sites. What this means is that the US 40 highway in the North Central region is a key road of agritourism prosperity. Next, we looked at the factor of environmental quality using natural amenity score, which combines climatic, topographic, and water-related factors to measure environmental quality. Here in the US, natural amenity score ranges from -6.4 to 11.2. What it means is a high natural amenity score indicates higher quality of natural amenities, and a low natural amenity score indicates low quality. Now, we mapped the distribution of environmental quality across the state using this score. Now, when we compare this map with a map of the distribution of the agritourism sites, we did not find much of a relationship. In fact, we found a very weak negative correlation. In other words, when we look at the metropolitan county areas, which had the highest proportion and concentration of these sites, many of these counties ended up having very low environmental quality, at the least. Now, what we did was to rank the environmental quality scores for the counties into two: those with positive environmental quality, which was ranked 4, and those with negative and poor environmental quality, ranked 3. We found that 2 counties with very low number of agritourism sites, Allegheny County in the western region and Washington County in the north central region, had the highest number of environmental quality. Now, when we looked at counties like Caroline and Howard and Carroll, which had quite good numbers, especially Carroll County, Howard County, and Montgomery counties, which had high proportion or concentration of agritourism sites, we in fact found that they had very low or low environmental quality. So this is something that still requires some studies, because it is not impossible to obtain a different result if we were to break the services into their different categories and examine them differently, because we found activities such as festivals were highly located in the more rural counties of in the lower Eastern Shore, compared to services like UPIC, picking fresh vegetable and fruits and farm markets, which were located in the more metropolitan counties of the North Central region. Now, one of the major factors which have led to the ingress of farmers, especially small income, medium-sized farmers and farmers from undersized communities into agritourism, is to earn additional income in order to retain their farm holdings, to maintain their assets, and of course, for employment purposes. So we examine income distribution, revenue generation from agritourism. When we looked at this variable across the entire United States from this chart, this is average US revenue from 2002 to 2017. If you look at the chart, you'll notice 3 spikes over this period, over this 15-year period. 3 spikes, an increase in agritourism. It occurred in 2002, 2007, and 2012. So what is showing us that we've had increases in income or spikes in average income from agritourism across the US after every 5 years within this particular period. Now, when we come down to the state of Maryland, using the North Central region again as an example, when we examine this for the North Central region, we notice that income from agritourism have been on a steady rise over the past decades in this region, particularly for Montgomery and Frederick counties. These two counties have consistently reported high revenue from agritourism. When we get close to it, you find that for Montgomery County, they've had an average annual revenue increase from agritourism of about 27.8%. For instance, in 2002, Montgomery earned $2.8 million from agritourism, but in 2007, they were earning $14.5 million. Now we see a similar picture for Frederick County, which had an average revenue increase of 13.5% annually. In 2002, Frederick County earned $4.3 million and earned $13 million in 2007. But what we notice in this region is that Baltimore, Howard, and Carroll counties earned quite very little comparatively in agritourism. Now, if we compare the income distribution over that period with the income distribution in the Upper Eastern Shore, for instance, we find the Upper Eastern Shore comprises the counties of Caroline, Cecil, Kent, Queen Anne's, and Talbot. What we find is that income in the Upper Eastern Shore, though it has changed considerably over this 15-year period, but it has been rather unsteady. Income in this area peaked in 2012 when Caroline County earned about $1 million from agritourism, and Queen Anne's County earned an average of $8 million from agritourism. But subsequently, by 2017, revenue from agritourism have decreased by 60% in Caroline County and by 29% in Queen Anne's County. What this shows is that agritourism income in this region continues to be unsteady in Maryland and really with no definite trend. Now the question is why? So we go to the challenges of agritourism. Now, one of the primary challenges that we identified was inconsistent legal framework and policies for managing agritourism. Now, as Dr. Cairo detailed, much of the impetus for our study was based on the passage of Bill 252 by the Maryland General Assembly, which provided a framework for the characterization of agritourism. Now, as recently as 2016 and 2017 or thereabout, the University of Maryland Agricultural Law Initiative, Education Initiative, have also conducted some studies in order to identify some of the primary liabilities to the development of the sector. And they looked at issues of limiting liabilities, particularly the challenges of farm to table direct marketing of produce. Now, other challenges include challenges of privacy, opening up farmlands to recreational purposes, provision of durable road signs, the challenges of transportation network, since these agritourism services are distributed across the state, even in the deep rural counties. And of course, the challenge of seasonal labor was equally identified. And then the challenge of training in the use of agritourism tools, marketing, and development of networking opportunities. And here we get down to perhaps the need for extension education. Now, we here at the UMES Extension believe that extension education can provide a platform to enhance the progress and sustainability of agritourism businesses in the state. Sustainability of agritourism income is one of the primary purposes for which many small, medium-sized, and farmers from underserved communities engage in agritourism in order for it to act as a supplementary mechanism to augment their income in order to retain their farm holdings. So this will require coordinating networking systems, training and education and management and marketing protocols to ensure the sustainability of this sector across the state. Well, in conclusion, our report, which was very in-depth, I've only been able to give a brief glimpse. What we addressed was the typology and distribution of agritourism across the state, the factors that may influence a farmer's motivation and decision to engage in agritourism, the factor of potential income generation and liabilities from the sector, and the need for extension education. Now, as Dr. Cairo have earlier detailed, for us, the next steps will be to engage in a survey of stakeholders to seek their inputs into the project. And when we say stakeholders, the whole gamut of stakeholders from farmers, program officers, extension educators, policymakers, and all the groups of individuals and organizations involved in agritourism development. UMES Extension also intends to develop an agritourism database to be a one-stop center for information on the progress, state, and development of agritourism in the state. UMES strategists and extension educators also intend to develop informational outreach programs, trainings, and workshops for stakeholders of agritourism. We also intend to create an online digital database for destinations for agritourism sites, hosting, mapping, and search tools for agritourism locations across the state. Well, I guess I'll stop for now and hand back over to Dr. Cairo for your questions. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ejiogu. And we will now open up the floor for questions. So if you could place your questions in the Q&A, then we can answer those. Now, there's already one question which I'll pose to you before Ms. Street steps in with the other questions, Dr. Diogu. This is from Dana from Sugarwater Manor, and she was asking whether there was a reason why the farm stay agritourism lodges were not included as agritourism type businesses.
Yeah, in fact, they were included in the report, in the main report. What we have just given is a glimpse of the report. In fact, we identified 38 categories of agritourism services across the state. And farm stay was in fact one of those services that we identified, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Street, are there other questions? Please place your questions in the Q&A.
So far, there are no further questions in the Q&A. Actually, it was the same question that you posed from the chat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So as you think of any questions, we are really very keen to get feedback from you as we move forward, because our goal is to develop a program that really serves the citizens in a useful and effective way. So right now, the survey should be almost ready to go out with a whole series of questions. And we're hoping that you will respond to the survey when we actually send it out.
Okay, so we have several questions that have come in, one from Jessica Andritz. What issues do we see about setbacks in local zoning ordinances that negatively impact ag tourism?
Yes, like I mentioned earlier, The impetus, one of the basic challenges for agritourism over the years have been from the framework of policy. Now, much of the impetus for this present study was derived from the framework recently provided in 2018 by the Maryland General Assembly. So we're still watching and studying that policy and watching the General Assembly as they engage in developing policies for agritourism. And really that is one of the main reasons that this report was created, and the subsequent studies and engagement of stakeholders that we want to do very recently, because we want to get the input of stakeholders, including policymakers, extension educators, and in fact, direct operators of agritourism sites, and engage the ideas about policies that could help the development of the center eventually. So policy making for agritourism in recent years have been a challenge until recently in 2018, when this fundamental framework was provided by the Maryland General Assembly through the passage of House Bill 252.
I see a second part to your question, Ms. Andritz. I think that he answered it. If not, please, type what other question you may have in the box. We have a question also from Nicole Cook. The database that you intended to develop is interesting. Will MDA be involved? And secondly, what information will be in the database?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, we realize that in order to create such a database and host a one-stop center for agritourism development here at UMES Extension, we will have to collaborate with a whole gamut of interest groups and organizations and policymakers involved in the development of agritourism. And of course, the bastion of agritourism is the agricultural community. And so without doubt, the MDA will be fully involved in as we progress in this area of development. Now, to your next question, the next question was, what are the kind of data that we want to assemble in the database? For one thing, one of the important data we want is to actually understand those stakeholders of agritourism across the state, capture their locations and the categories of services they offer, and also understand some of the challenges that they face, and be able to articulate a database that follows them progressively into the future as UMES Extension and others involved work in partnership in order to further develop the sector. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the primary problems for agritourism is sustainability. As we can see, when we looked at a chart for a revenue earning from the Upper Eastern Shore region, you can find that after a period, an upward period of increased earning in agritourism, within the next 5 years, we saw this very significant decline in our income. So this is a problem of sustainability of income from agritourism. And so these are some of the issues that UMES Extension is tackling and developing strategies in order to better provide the right kind of training and education, networking systems, marketing protocols, platforms for synergies between the stakeholders to aid in developing an agritourism center that is progressive and sustainable across the state. I hope that answers your question.
We have another question. Can you tell us about the growth of roadside stands in Montgomery and Howard counties? What constitutes a durable roadside stand as opposed to a non-durable stand?
necessarily when we looked at what you mean roadside stands, those are farm stalls or farm stands. When we looked at the distribution of farm stands, we noticed that the high proportion of farm stands were found perhaps in the lower eastern shore areas where you have the small and medium-sized farms. Now, for Montgomery County, what we found were a high proportion of farm stalls rather. Okay, so we did not go into examining the durability of farm stalls. At this present stage, what we looked at was the distribution, the spatial distribution, and the typology of these services across the state. And like I said earlier, this is an ongoing work, is work in progress, and we appreciate all your input on the kind of structures and information that perhaps you as an agritourism stakeholder would want to be able to access in such a database. And of course, very soon we shall be sending out the stakeholder survey where you would have the opportunity to make this input. Thank you.
Okay, and again from Jessica Andritz. Has Extension analyzed the impact of local zoning ordinances on the ag tourism industry? Are there some best practices that can be shared?
Well, at this stage, I can tell you frankly that we have not conducted such a study or research. It was not really part of the present objective of the present study. But we know that the University of Maryland Agricultural Law Initiative, Education Law Initiative, have engaged in similar studies. And these are some of the things that I believe as we move along this path, that UMES Extension will also be digging into along the line, yes.
Okay, another question from Eve Duncan. When can we expect that database to be available? And will it provide links to Maryland guidelines as well as assist with the 5 Ps of marketing for first-time farmers?
Yes, we're really here at UMES Extension, we're really ready and raring to go. Soon, the stakeholder surveys will go out so that we can have your input. We want to develop an agritourism database and center that is all-encompassing. It's going to be something worked out through collaboration of all stakeholders. And so these are some of the features that we hope to look into. If you ask me about when, I can certainly tell you very soon, because we're really working on this. We're working very hard on this. Very soon, expect to hear from us.
It's 3:55, Dr. Cairo. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me again thank all the participants who have attended this afternoon and who have been asking questions. We do hope to keep this dialogue open. And before I close, I just wanted to ask whether any of the other panelists had anything else to add. Otherwise, I'll bring it to a close. So for any of the panelists, Steve.
Dr. Cairo, the only thing I'd like to add is there is a representative of the agritourism industry on the Maryland Ag Commission. That's a recently new position on the Ag Commission. And the Maryland Ag Commission does advise the Maryland Secretary of Agriculture and the Maryland Department of Agriculture on policy issues. Just thought I'd just mention that.
Thank you. That's actually pretty useful information. Dr. Escobar.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that in reference to the local zoning, we at UMES Extension would like to develop education programs to also educate local zoning agencies and hopefully explain that local agritourism is a benefit and a revenue source for the communities. So that also will be included in the programs that in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Escobar. So let me thank all the participants again, and I really do urge you to look out for emails from us as we try to move this forward. I think one of the most immediate next steps is going to be this survey that we would like to conduct, and we look forward to your support. And again, reach out to us in case there are any questions. Now, there are a few more questions that have popped up. Let me see if I can quickly respond to any before we close. So are there any grants out there to support agritourism? I think there are grants, if you think about it in a broader context. It all depends on the context that you actually put in. And that's one of the things we are going to be looking at. And then, yep, that's it. So again, thank you all to the participants. We really appreciate that you could spend your 1 hour with us this afternoon, and please watch this space. Thank you all.